He was the coldest alpha the North had ever seen, feared in battle, ruthless in command, and completely untouched by love. Noblewomen traveled miles just to stand in his office, hoping for a glance. But the one woman who never tried to win him, the quiet Omega who brewed his tea, arranged his war maps, and endured his sharp commands with a gentle smile, was the only one who ever truly captured his heart. And the day she finally kissed him under falling snow, her wolf awakened for the first time in his arms. The first time Vieira stepped into the Alpha's office, she thought it looked like a battlefield after the dust had settled. Papers sprawled across the mahogany desk in chaotic layers, territorial dispute reports mixed with trade agreements, military correspondence tangled with formal dinner invitations from noble families across the northern territories. Books lay open and abandoned, their spines cracked, pages marked with hasty notes in sharp, angular handwriting. Maps covered one entire wall, some pinned crookedly, others curling at the edges. The scent of old leather, wood smoke, and something darker, something unmistakably him, hung heavy in the air. The late afternoon light filtering through the tall windows did little to warm the space. Everything here felt cold, deliberate, untouched by softness. Vieira stood in the doorway, her worn leather satchel clutched against her chest, and wondered what exactly she had been volunteered for. "You're the new office manager?" The voice came from behind the desk, and Vieira's breath caught despite her best efforts to remain calm. Alpha Oren Ironclaw didn't look up from the document he was reading. He sat in a high-backed chair that seemed carved from the same unforgiving stone as his reputation, one hand gripping a fountain pen, the other tapping an impatient rhythm against the armrest. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd run his fingers through it too many times. The late afternoon light cast harsh shadows across his face, all sharp angles and hard lines, a jaw that looked like it had been designed to deliver verdicts, not smiles. He was exactly as fearsome as the stories claimed. "Yes, Alpha." Vieira's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm Vieira. I was assigned by the estate manager to—" "I know what you were assigned to do. The question is whether you'll last longer than the previous 3. 3? Vieira hadn't known there had been 3 before her. She stepped into the office, letting the heavy door close behind her with a soft click. "I'll do my best, Alpha." "Your best." He finally glanced up, and the weight of his gaze, ice blue and assessing, landed on her like a physical thing. For a moment something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Your best won't matter if you can't follow instructions without asking questions every 5 minutes. I don't have time to train assistants. I need someone competent." "Understood." Vieira set her satchel down on the small side table near the door. She kept her voice level, her hands steady. Years of living quietly in the background had taught her how to absorb harsh words without flinching. "Where would you like me to start?" Oren stared at her for a long moment, as if waiting for her to crumble under the weight of his attention. When she simply gazed back, not defiant, not afraid, just waiting, he made a sound that might have been approval or irritation. It was impossible to tell. "Start by making sense of this disaster." He gestured vaguely at the desk. "I have a council meeting in 3 hours. I need the northern border reports organized by region, the trade proposals separated from the military briefings, and someone to explain to me why I have 17 dinner invitations this week when I've already declined 12. 17. Vieira moved toward the desk, already assessing the chaos with a practiced eye. She'd spent years managing the estate's lower archives, a thankless job that required precision, patience, and the ability to create order from overwhelming disorder. This was messier, certainly, but not impossible. "The invitations are likely from noble families hoping to secure alliances," she said quietly, already beginning to sort the papers into distinct piles. or introduce eligible daughters? Oren's jaw tightened. I'm aware of their motivations. Of course, Alpha. Vieira's hands moved efficiently, creating neat stacks. Border reports here, trade proposals there, personal correspondence, most of it perfumed, in a separate pile near the edge of the desk. Would you like me to draft polite refusals, or would you prefer to handle them personally? You draft them, I'll sign them. He returned his attention to his own document, effectively dismissing her. And make tea, the afternoon blend, not that bitter swill the kitchen keeps sending up. Vieira paused, her fingers resting on a stack of military briefings. What blend do you prefer? For the first time, Oren looked genuinely surprised. You're asking? Yes, Alpha. If I'm going to make your tea, I should know how you take it. He studied her again, that same assessing look, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. Pine needle and chamomile, steeped for exactly 4 minutes. No sugar, no milk. Understood. Vieira moved to the small tea station in the corner, another chaotic collection of mismatched containers and abandoned cups. She found the pine needle blend buried behind 3 other tins, measured it carefully, set the water to boil. While she waited, she continued organizing the desk, her movements quiet and methodical. The office gradually settled into a rhythm. The scratch of Oren's pen, the soft rustle of papers, the low whistle of the kettle. When Vieira placed the cup of tea beside his elbow, exactly 4 minutes, steeped, no sugar, no milk, Oren paused mid-sentence. He lifted the cup, inhaled, took a single sip. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened, just slightly. Acceptable, he murmured. Vieira returned to the desk and continued working. Outside, the winter afternoon deepened toward dusk, and the Alpha's office, for the first time in months, began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a place where work could actually be done. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Vieira arrived each morning before dawn, when the estate was still wrapped in the deep blue silence that preceded sunrise. She would let herself into the office with the key the estate manager had given her, light the lamps, and stoke the fire until warmth began to chase away the night's chill. Then she would assess the damage from the previous day, documents scattered, teacups abandoned, books left open, and quietly restore order. By the time Alpha Oren arrived, usually just as the sun broke over the eastern mountains, the office would be ready. Tea brewing, papers organized, the day's schedule written in her careful handwriting on the board beside his desk. He never thanked her, but he also never complained. Vieira learned his patterns quickly. He took his tea every 2 hours, pine and chamomile in the morning, black tea with a single spoon of honey after lunch, peppermint in the evening when his jaw was tight from stress. He hated interruptions during the hour after dawn, when he reviewed military reports. He preferred natural light to lamplight whenever possible. He worked best in silence, but the silence couldn't be empty. He needed the subtle sounds of someone else working nearby, papers rustling, pens scratching, the quiet proof that he wasn't alone. She learned to anticipate his moods, too. When he arrived with his shoulders rigid and his expression darker than usual, she would reschedule any non-essential meetings, giving him space to work through whatever storm was building in his mind. When he spent too long staring at the same document, she would bring fresh tea and quietly mention an appointment that required his attention, giving him permission to step away without admitting he needed the break. She learned that he hated crowds, but tolerated them for duty, that he had no patience for flattery, but would listen to honest counsel, that beneath the ice-cold exterior there was something else, something careful and controlled and deeply, deeply lonely. But she never said any of this aloud. She was just the office manager, the quiet omega who kept his world organized, nothing more. 3 weeks into her assignment, the first of the noble visitors arrived. Lady Morena Silverfang swept into the office like a winter storm made flesh, all silver silk and practiced grace, her dark hair elaborately braided, sapphires glittering at her throat. She was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, polished, perfect, designed to impress. "Alpha Orin," her voice was honey over steel. "How wonderful to finally visit your famous estate." Orin looked up from his work, his expression neutral. "Lady Morena, I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "Oh, you know how these formal arrangements can be." She waved one elegant hand dismissively, her gaze sliding over Vieira as though she were part of the furniture. "I was in the region visiting family and simply had to pay my respects to the North's most eligible Alpha." Vieira quietly excused herself to the small antechamber where she kept supplies, giving them privacy. But the door didn't quite close all the way, and sound carried. "Your estate is magnificent," Lady Morena continued, "though I notice it lacks a Luna's touch. A place like this deserves warmth, don't you think? A woman's influence to soften all these hard edges." "I prefer hard edges." Orin's tone was flat. "They're honest." Honest, perhaps, but lonely. There was a pause. Vieira found herself holding her breath, though she didn't know why. "Lady Morena, I appreciate your visit, but I have a council session in 20 minutes. If there's specific pack business you wish to discuss." "Must everything be business with you?" Lady Morena's laugh was musical, calculated. "Surely even the great Alpha Ironclaw understands the value of personal connections." "I understand their value perfectly, which is why I'm selective about which ones I pursue." The dismissal in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Vieira heard the rustle of silk, the sharp click of expensive boots on hardwood. "Very well, Alpha, but do consider, a strong alliance between Silverfang and Ironclaw would benefit both our territories, and I make an excellent Luna. Just ask anyone." "I'll take that under advisement." More footsteps, the door opening, then closing with a firm click. Silence. Vieira waited a respectful moment before emerging from the antechamber, carrying a fresh stack of correspondence that had just been delivered. Orin was standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. His shoulders were tight. "Alpha, the council session materials are ready whenever." "How many more?" His voice was quiet, too quiet. Vieira paused. "Alpha? How many more women like that are scheduled to visit the region this month?" She set the correspondence down and checked the large calendar she'd created to track his appointments. 4 confirmed visits from noble families. 2 more have sent inquiries about appropriate visiting times. Orin's jaw worked. Cancel them. All of them? All of them. He turned to face her, and for just a moment his carefully controlled expression slipped. He looked tired. "Tell them I'm occupied with territorial matters. Tell them whatever will make them stop treating my office like a matchmaking parlor." "Of course, Alpha." He studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his ice-blue eyes. "You don't ask questions." "You don't like questions, Alpha." "No, I don't. But most people ask them anyway. Why don't you?" Vieira considered her answer carefully. "Because you're not looking for conversation, you're looking for competence." Something flickered across his face, almost like recognition. "The council session," he said finally, returning to his papers. "Make sure the territorial maps are current, and tell them we're starting 10 minutes early. I want this over with before dinner." "Already done, Alpha." He glanced up sharply, then down at his desk where she'd already placed the updated maps, properly labeled and organized by region. For a long moment, he just looked at them. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Thank you." Vieira felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She pushed it down, professional and detached. "You're welcome, Alpha." She returned to her work, and the office settled back into its comfortable rhythm. The scratch of pen on paper, the crackle of the fire, the peaceful silence of two people who had learned to work in the same space without getting in each other's way. Outside, winter deepened its hold on the northern territories, and inside, something neither of them had names for began to very quietly to shift.
It started with small things, the way she arranged his documents, grouping related items together without needing instruction, the way she scheduled breaks between his most stressful meetings, as if she could sense when his patience would wear thin, the way she always had his tea ready exactly when he needed it, not too early, not too late, just perfectly timed to his internal rhythm. Oren had never paid attention to such details before. People served him because he was alpha. They anticipated his needs because they feared disappointing him. It was transactional, expected. But Vieira was different. She didn't move through his office with the nervous energy of someone trying to avoid his displeasure. She moved with quiet purpose, as though she found satisfaction in the work itself, in creating order from chaos, in solving small problems before they became large ones, in the simple act of making his day run more smoothly. She hummed sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention, soft, wordless melodies that seemed to carry the weight of contentment. Oren found himself listening to those melodies. One morning in late December, he arrived at the office to find her kneeling beside his bookshelf, reorganizing the volumes that had become hopelessly disordered over the past months. She'd removed every single book and was methodically sorting them, histories with histories, military strategy with military strategy, pack law with pack law. Sunlight streamed through the window behind her, catching in her honey-brown hair, making it glow like autumn leaves. She wore a simple gray dress, practical and unadorned, but something about the way she moved, careful, methodical, completely absorbed in her task, made Oren pause in the doorway. She was graceful, not in the practiced, performative way of the noblewomen who visited his office, but in a quieter way, the grace of someone who found beauty in small, necessary tasks. "Vieira?" She started slightly, turning to look at him over her shoulder. A light flush colored her cheeks. "Alpha, I'm sorry. I know I should have asked permission before rearranging your books, but they were becoming difficult to locate, and I thought, it's fine." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "You were right. They needed organizing." She relaxed slightly, returning her attention to the books. "I'll be finished before your first appointment." Oren moved to his desk, but found himself watching her instead of beginning his work. The way her fingers traced the spines of the books, reading titles. The way she frowned slightly when deciding where something should go. The way she pucked a strand of hair behind her ear when it fell forward into her face. "How long have you been here this morning?" he asked. "Since before dawn, Alpha." She placed a thick volume on territorial law onto the shelf. "The estate manager delivered the annual budget reports late yesterday. I wanted to have them organized before you arrived." Before dawn, which meant she'd been working in the pre-dawn darkness, alone in his office, making his life easier without being asked. "You don't have to arrive so early." "I know, Alpha." She smiled, just slightly. "But I prefer it. The estate is peaceful before everyone wakes, and it gives me time to prepare properly." "Prepare for what?" "For you." The words were simple, matter-of-fact, but they landed in Oren's chest with unexpected weight. For you. Not for her duties, not for her responsibilities. For him. Vieira finished organizing the last shelf and stood, brushing dust from her dress. "Your tea will be ready in a moment. I also took the liberty of rescheduling your meeting with the Southern Trade Delegation to later in the afternoon. You have a tendency to be sharper in the mornings, and they respond better to your diplomatic mode." Oren almost smiled. "My diplomatic mode?" "Yes, Alpha." She moved to the tea station, completely unaware of how her casual understanding of his moods had just disarmed him. The version of you that appears after lunch when you've had time to process the morning's information and your patience has replenished slightly. I'm not aware my patience depletes. It does, Alpha, around mid-morning, usually right after you've dealt with the fourth minor territorial dispute of the week. He did smile then, just barely. You've been keeping track. Of course. She poured his tea, pine and chamomile, steeped for exactly 4 minutes, and brought it to his desk. When she set it down, their hands brushed, just for a second, just the barest contact, but Oren felt it like a shock of static electricity. Vieira pulled her hand back quickly, professional and composed, but he saw the way her breath caught, the way her pulse fluttered at her throat. She'd felt it too. "Will there be anything else, Alpha?" Her voice was steady, but she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "No, thank you." She returned to her work, and Oren forced himself to focus on the budget reports she'd so carefully organized, but his attention kept drifting, to the way sunlight moved across her shoulders as she worked, to the soft sound of her breathing, to the faint scent of lavender that clung to her, simple and clean, so different from the heavy perfumes the noble visitors wore. He caught himself listening to her footsteps when she moved from one part of the office to another, caught himself noticing when she paused to massage her wrist after too much writing, caught himself caring about things he had no business caring about. This was dangerous. This was stupid. She was his office manager, an omega, someone who worked for him, whose entire position depended on his approval. And yet, when she left that evening, calling out a soft, "Good night, Alpha," as she gathered her satchel, the office felt empty, hollow, cold in a way that had nothing to do with winter. Oren stared at the door she'd closed behind her and felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. He'd spent 32 years building walls around himself, 32 years learning that power meant isolation, that leadership meant loneliness, that an alpha's heart was a liability that could be exploited. So why did her absence feel like the loss of something essential? Why did he already find himself counting the hours until dawn when she would return? The noble visitors continued, despite Vieira's politely worded refusals. They arrived in expensive carriages, draped in furs and jewels, trailing clouds of perfume and expectation. Lady Celeste from the eastern peaks, Lady Vivienne from the coastal territories, Lady Margot from the southern plains, each one more determined than the last to catch the attention of the North's most powerful and most eligible alpha. Oren tolerated them with cold politeness, never encouraging, never fully dismissing. They were daughters of allied families, representatives of important political connections. He couldn't afford to offend them outright, but he noticed things. He noticed how they looked at Vieira, when they bothered to acknowledge her at all, how their gazes slid past her as though she were invisible, how they would interrupt her mid-sentence if she tried to mention his schedule or prior commitments, how they would laugh high and brittle at jokes Oren didn't make, performing their interest like a rehearsed play. And he noticed how Vieira responded, with grace, with patience, with quiet dignity that put their practiced performances to shame. She never competed for his attention, never tried to insert herself into conversations where she wasn't wanted, never showed even a flicker of jealousy or resentment when yet another beautiful woman arrived claiming to have business with the alpha. She simply stepped back, made herself small, disappeared into the background of her own workspace, and it made Oren furious in ways he couldn't quite name. It was Lady Vivian who finally crossed a line. She arrived on a particularly cold afternoon in mid-January when frost had turned the windows into fields of crystalline flowers and the fire in Oren's office roared against the chill. Vieira had been organizing correspondence at the side table when Vivian swept in,
all golden hair and crimson silk, her smile sharp and calculating. "Lady Vivian, how wonderful to see you again." She'd visited twice before, each time finding increasingly creative reasons to extend her stay. "I've brought tea from my family's private reserve. I thought we might share a cup while discussing the proposed alliance between our territories." Oren glanced up from the military report he'd been reviewing. "Lady Vivian, I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "A minor oversight." She waved one elegant hand, then turned to Vieira with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You there, girl, prepare the tea I've brought, and do try not to ruin it. It's worth more than your yearly salary." Vieira's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Of course, my lady." But Oren saw it, the tiny tightening at the corners of her eyes, the way her shoulders straightened just slightly, absorbing the insult without reaction. Something hot and protective flared in his chest. "Vieira," he said, his voice colder than the winter air outside, "there's no need. Lady Vivian won't be staying long enough for tea." Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Oh, but surely you can spare a few moments to discuss—" "No." Oren set down his pen with deliberate precision. "I cannot. As my office manager would have informed you if you'd bothered to schedule properly, my afternoons are reserved for territorial security briefings, non-negotiable." "But Alpha, furthermore," he stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "In my office, you will address my staff with respect. Vieira is not girl, she is Miss Thorne, and she manages more complex logistics in a single morning than most nobles handle in a month. If you cannot extend her basic courtesy, you are not welcome here." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Vivian's face had gone pale, then flushed bright red. Her mouth opened and closed twice before she finally managed, I apologize, Alpha. I meant no disrespect." "Didn't you?" Oren's voice was soft, dangerous. "Then I suggest you consider why your first instinct was to belittle someone for doing her job competently while you interrupt mine." He moved around his desk, a clear dismissal. "Miss Thorne will see you out." Vivian gathered her silk skirts, her composure cracking. "Alpha, please, I've traveled so far." "Then travel back, carefully." He turned away, returning his attention to his reports. "And, Lady Vivian, don't return without an appointment. Miss Thorne's time is valuable, even if you don't think so." The door closed behind Vivian with a sharp click. For a long moment, neither Oren nor Vieira moved. Then, very quietly, Vieira said, "You didn't have to do that, Alpha." "Yes, I did." He didn't look up from his report, but his jaw was tight. She was out of line. "She's a noble. You're my office manager." Now he did look up, and the intensity in his ice-blue daze made Vieira's breath catch. "You keep this office running, you keep me running, and I don't tolerate anyone disrespecting the people who work for me." "It's just words, Alpha. I'm used to—" "You shouldn't have to be." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Vieira's cheeks flushed slightly. "Thank you, Alpha. Don't thank me for basic decency." Oren returned to his report, but his concentration was shattered. All he could think about was the resigned way Vieira said, "I'm used to it." How many times had she absorbed casual cruelty? How many times had she made herself small and quiet and invisible to avoid drawing attention? How many times had he failed to notice? The realization sat heavy in his chest for the rest of the afternoon. And when Vieira left that evening, he found himself standing at the window watching her small figure disappear down the snow-covered path towards the staff cottages, and wondering when exactly this competent, quiet Omega had become the most important person in his carefully controlled world. February arrived with fresh snow and a diplomatic crisis that required Oren's attention in the Eastern Territories. He'd be gone for at least a week, possibly 2, overseeing negotiations between rival pacts whose centuries-old grudges were threatening to explode into open conflict.
It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes situation that required his direct involvement. He should have been focused entirely on strategy. Instead, on his third morning away, he found himself wondering if Vieira remembered to schedule time for her lunch, or if she was working through her breaks the way she did when the office got particularly busy. It was ridiculous. It was inappropriate. It was undeniable. "Alpha Orin?" The messenger who'd been assigned to him looked concerned. "The Eastern Pac's representative is ready for the morning session." "I'll be there." Orin forced his attention back to the present, to the delicate diplomatic dance that would occupy his next several hours. But his mind wandered anyway. He wondered if the fire in his office was burning properly, or if it was smoking again the way it did when the wood wasn't fully seasoned. Wondered if the new batch of military reports had arrived yet, and if they were as disorganized as the last set. Wondered if anyone had made Vieira tea, or if she'd been too busy managing everything else to take care of herself. He wondered if she'd noticed his absence at all, or if the office ran just as smoothly without him. The thought shouldn't have bothered him as much as it did. On the fifth day, he cut a negotiation session short. The mediator looked surprised. "Alpha Orin, we've made excellent progress. If we continue for another few hours—" "Tomorrow." Orin was already gathering his papers. "We'll resume tomorrow. Everyone could use a night to reflect on what's been discussed." It was a reasonable excuse. It was also a lie. The truth was that he'd been away from Ironclaw Estate for 5 days, and the pull to return, to see her, to hear her voice, to walk into his office and find everything exactly as it should be because she had made it so, was stronger than his desire to finish the negotiations ahead of schedule. He left at dawn the next morning, making excuses about urgent pack business that required his immediate attention. The journey that had taken 2 leisurely days on the way out, he completed in one hard push, arriving back at the estate just as the winter sun was setting. The staff seemed surprised to see him. "Alpha, we weren't expecting you until next week at the earliest." Plans changed. Orin handed off his travel cloak and went directly to his office, his heart beating harder than it should have been. The door was unlocked. She was still there. Vieira stood at his desk, surrounded by neat stacks of correspondence, a pen in her hand as she wrote something in her careful script. She'd lit the lamps against the gathering darkness, and firelight played across her features, softening the concentration on her face. She looked up when he entered, and her expression transformed, surprise melting into something that looked almost like relief, then settling into her usual warm professionalism. "Alpha, I wasn't expecting you back so soon." The negotiations concluded early. Another lie. He moved into the office, suddenly aware of how travel-worn he must look, how he probably smelled of horse and winter roads. "Everything's running smoothly." She gestured to the organized stacks. "The council approved the new trade routes. The southern border dispute was resolved through mediation. I've been coordinating with the estate manager to prepare for the winter festival next month." Of course she had. Of course everything was perfect. "You're working late," he observed. "I wanted to have everything ready for your return." She set down her pen, and for the first time he noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, the slight slump to her shoulders that suggested she'd been pushing herself too hard. "I know you prefer to review the week's activities first thing in the morning, so I was preparing the summary." She'd stayed late, preparing for him. "When did you last eat?" The question came out sharper than he'd intended. Vieira blinked, surprised. "I had breakfast, Alpha." "Breakfast?" He glanced at the window where full darkness had fallen. "It's nearly evening." "Is it?" She followed his gaze, looking genuinely startled. "I didn't realize how late it had gotten." Something in Orin's chest tightened. "Stop." "Alpha?" "Stop working." He moved closer, and she took an instinctive step back, not from fear, he realized, but from awareness, from the sudden shift in energy between them. You've been here since dawn. You need to eat. You need to rest. But the summary can wait until tomorrow. Alpha, that's an order, Vieira. She fell silent, and for a moment they just looked at each other. The office felt smaller somehow, warmer. The firelight cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the honey gold of her eyes, the soft curve of her mouth. Oren realized, with a jolt that felt like falling, that he'd missed her. Not the organized desk, not the perfect tea, not the efficient way she managed his schedule. Her. Her quiet presence, her gentle competence, the way she moved through his world like water, essential, life-giving, impossible to hold, but devastating in absence. "Did you miss me?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Vieira's eyes widened. Color flooded her cheeks. "Alpha, Never mind." He turned away sharply, cursing himself. What was he doing? "The office felt empty without you." Her voice was soft, almost inaudible. But he heard it. Oren turned back slowly. "What?" Vieira was looking down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. The office felt empty. It runs fine without you, of course. All the work gets done. But it felt..." She trailed off, seeming to search for words. "Hollow, like the heart of it was missing." The heart of it? Oren couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at this woman, this quiet, humble Omega who somehow saw past his cold exterior to something worth missing, and feel the last of his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Vieira. She looked up, and the vulnerability in her gaze nearly undid him. He took a step toward her, then another, not touching, not presuming, just closer. "I cut the negotiations short," he said quietly. "I told everyone it was urgent pack business, but that was a lie. I came back early because I couldn't stand being away from..." He caught himself. "From here, from Ironclaw, from you." He didn't say it, but she heard it anyway. He saw understanding dawn in her eyes, followed immediately by confusion, then something that looked like fear. "Alpha, you can't... I'm not..." She wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture. "I'm nobody, just your office manager. You can't..." "Can't what?" "Feel that way about me." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm an Omega with no family, no status, no connections. You're the alpha of the North's most powerful pack. There are women, important women, who would give anything for your attention. And you're standing here telling me you cut diplomatic negotiations short because you missed your office?" "I didn't miss my office. Alpha, I missed you, Vieira." The words came out raw, unguarded. "I missed your voice, your presence, the way you hum when you think I'm not listening, the way you've memorized my moods better than I know them myself. I missed..." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and longing warring in his chest. "I missed the only person who's ever made me feel less alone." Silence. Complete, ringing silence. Vieira stared at him as though he'd just announced the sky was falling. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "I do. But I'm..." "Everything." The word came out fierce, certain. "You're everything this place needed and everything I didn't know I was looking for." Vieira's eyes glistened. She shook her head slowly. "Alpha Oren, you don't understand. You're used to being desired, used to being pursued. What you're feeling right now, it's probably just because I'm the only woman who hasn't thrown herself at you. It's novelty. It will pass." The assessment stung because there was truth in it. He was used to being desired. But this ache in his chest, this longing that had nothing to do with conquest and everything to do with connection, this was new territory. "Do you think I don't know the difference?" he asked quietly. "I think..." Vieira's voice trembled. "I think you're lonely, Alpha, and I'm convenient. I'm here. I'm kind to you. But that's not love. That's just proximity." "Then explain why I can't sleep when you're not here." He took another step closer. She didn't back away this time, though her hands were shaking. "Explain why your footsteps every morning, why your absence feels like winter itself, why the thought of you leaving, of losing you, makes me want to burn the world down." "Alpha, my name is Oren, and I'm asking you to see me, not the Alpha, not the title. Me. The man who waits for you every morning, who counts the hours until you return, who has never, not once in his entire life, wanted something he couldn't have until you." A tear slid down Vieira's cheek. "This won't work," she whispered. "The pack would never accept it. I'm too low-born, too insignificant. You need a Luna who can stand beside you, who can represent the pack with dignity and grace, not someone who—" "You are dignified. You are graceful." I wanted to reach for her, wanted to wipe away that tear, but he kept his hands at his sides, giving her space, giving her control. "You're everything a Luna should be, and you don't even see it." "I see reality, Alpha, and reality is that I'm a placeholder, someone you notice because I'm the only one who doesn't demand your attention. But the moment you find someone truly worthy of you, someone who can actually help you lead, who comes from the right families, who knows how to navigate pack politics, you'll forget all about the quiet Omega who made your tea." The words landed like blows. Oren felt them in his chest, sharp and cutting. "Is that truly what you think?" His voice had gone very quiet. "That you're replaceable?" "I think I'm being realistic, Alpha, and I think you deserve better than settling for someone just because she's convenient. You are not—" "I need to go." She gathered her satchel with shaking hands. "It's late. You should rest. You've had a long journey." "Vieira, please!" "Good night, Alpha." She was gone before he could stop her. The door closed with a soft click, and Oren was left standing in his office, the office that felt hollow without her, wondering how he'd managed to say everything and nothing all at once, wondering how he'd found the one woman in the world he couldn't command, couldn't intimidate, couldn't have through sheer force of will. The possibility of rejection, the reality of love.